if you look over my shoulder, you'll see the E Division sign, which is the E Division, which was dormitories in Pentridge. I never spent any time in dormitories. Being a armed robber or bank robber, you were rated as, I think you were rated as supposedly a violent, aggressive criminal, so you weren't to be housed in dormitories, at least until they had assessed your personality. But actually going to tell you about a little story which should deter anybody from wanting to come to jail, because you never know what's going to happen. And this is a true story, and the character in it who did the violence actually died in the JICA fires, Dave McGawley. And I'd known Dave right through his jail. First time I met Dave, he actually attacked me. By the time the screws got there, I was on top of him, punching him repeatedly in the face, and the screws dragged me away. Next time I saw Dave was about a year later, when he had a backup of about 3 people, and he fronted me and said, so you want to go on with it? And I said, basically, who are you? He said, I'm Dave McGawley. And I go, so what? And then he said, well, you know, we had a little bit of a problem. I go, I don't have any problems, mate. And he said, well, what, you want to go on with it or what? I go, mate, I don't really care either way. And him and his offsiders, so there was 4 of them, 3 standing outside my cell, and him in the doorway. And I just said, whatever you want to do, mate, we'll sort it. And sorry, just waving to one of the construction heads of the construction company out here at Pentridge. So that second time I saw Dave, he offered to continue it, and I said, I don't really give a stuff, mate, whatever you want to do. And he walked away. And I went, well, they had their chance. There was 4 of them, and they still walked away, and I'd beaten him up the time before. But Dave was in for basically a domestic murder. But for some reason he wanted to prove to everybody how tough he was and how good he was and how big a gangster he was. And he affiliated himself with some people with a reputation, one being Robbie Wright, who was spending a lot of time down at JICA. Robbie had a big reputation for murder, and he had a bit of a reputation, but he gathered soldiers, people like Jimmy Loveton, who was, if anybody's seen the movie Chopper Read, supposedly in the movie of Chopper Read, Jimmy stabbed Chopper, which is not true, but it continued the legacy of Jimmy Loveton. Jimmy certainly did do a lot of damage to other people, and in a strange way, Jimmy became one of my friends over the years. I had respect for people who actually told you what they thought, and they stood by what they thought and what they said. We'll get back to Dave. This is the sort of things that go on in jail, and why you should never want to come to jail. He'd been associating with Robbie Wright and Jimmy and all these people, and he was told that he was in a different part of the jail, but they got a message to him, and he was told to stab a bloke, and if he didn't stab the bloke, he'd be in trouble himself. So Dave McGawley, in his wise thoughts of wisdom, decided he would stab a bloke he didn't even know, and that's what he did. He waited for an ambush to guy that he didn't know, and the other guy didn't know him. So this poor bloke, who was totally unaware of McGawley, was stabbed in the back with a big butcher's knife. It's such a big knife, it went in so far that McGawley couldn't even pull the knife out and left him laying on the ground. When the screws found him, they rolled him over to find this big knife in his back. And the guy didn't die, but he was partially paralysed and couldn't walk. Had to learn to walk again, so it took him about a year or so to recover and learn to walk again. But McGawley did that purely because he wanted to be a somebody in jail, and that's the problem you have. you might not even know your enemies, and they can just come out of the blue and put a knife in you. Well, Macaulay had his chances with me, but in his, as I said, his wise wisdom, he, with two others, attacked my brother later on, which I found out about, obviously, pretty quickly, and sent word that, well, this time, when I find you, I'm going to sort you. And a few years passed, and I got the opportunity to get into a yard in H Division, and it was near Christmas, and Macaulay asked if he could come into the yard and for Christmas lunch, and I said, of course you can come in the yard. And he had two of his friends with him. One was already in the yard with me, and another friend, associate, so there was three against me. So this man that could run around and stab people, when he actually had to look me in the eye, and he had to actually not sneak go me like they did to my brother and to the other guy that they stabbed, when he had to look me in the eye and attack me, he didn't have the fortitude. And that's the sort of people you meet in jail. So Macaulay never worried me, and sadly Dave ended up dying in the JICA fire because he was following orders from Robbie Wright again, where they barricaded and set JICA alight. So in the end, his affiliation with Robbie Wright actually was his demise on many occasions, but his final demise was he died in the JICA fires. Now, he would have died anyway sooner or later, because if you keep pushing the wrong people, you didn't last too long. And my attitude to him, the last time I saw him was in the yard with two of his cohorts, and I was 1 against 3, and I said, well, let's see how big you are today. And he put his hands up in the air and said, come on, Doug, let's let it go. You know, your brother deserved a beating. And I said, well, no, he's my brother, and you don't get the right to beat my brother. And if you want to go on with it, do it now when there's 3-1, because you know you ain't no chance on your own. And it's just the way jail was. You didn't have to worry about people who walk up and look at you in the eye. What you had to worry about is people you didn't even know that might stab you or bash you on the word of somebody else, purely as a favour to somebody else. And this is a big problem in jails, because you don't even know that you've got a problem, and it just comes out of the blue. You're looking to the left, and the knife comes from the right, and you can't defend from when there's 1,000 people in those days in Pentridge. You can't defend against 1,000 people who are sneaking around doing dirty chores for people and stabbing people and bashing people on, basically to try and elevate themselves up the ladder of the hierarchy of the so-called tough boys. Well, most of the tough boys weren't that tough when they were on their own.